This is On Base, your one-stop shop for solving your most pressing B2B go-to-market challenges. Each week, hosts Chris Moody and Paul Gibson talk to sales and marketing leaders to get you in-depth insights and creative strategies to set your revenue teams up for success.
Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm your host, Chris Moody, and this is the second part of our series on the cookieless future. Today, I'm very excited to talk to Kara Alcamo and Rachel Cursai on this topic. So Kara and Rachel, could you please give our listeners a glimpse into your backgrounds?
Yeah, sure. I'm Kara. I founded the agency, and congrats, you got my last name right. I tell everyone you have to do the pizza hands when you say my last name because it's Sicilian, so it's Alcamo. It's the best way to remember it. And the name of our agency, Alcamo Marketing. So my background, I spent 15 more years in various marketing agencies working across strategy, media, SEO, content, technology. And, in the last 8-ish years, I really felt like there was a gap between the way that an agency was structured and the services they provide and what consultants do and what B2B brands actually needed. So I started this company as a consultancy, or consultagency, which is a hybrid of the big picture, business-oriented thinking of a consultant and the execution capabilities of an agency. So professional side, personal side, I have to point out, I am a beekeeper, Maryland beekeeper, proud beekeeper. I'm also known as the chicken lady. We're up to 28 right now. So I have a regenerative permaculture style garden farm at my property, bunch of chickens, 2 cats, a dog, 4+ beehives, and a horse, and an adult man, which I say with love.
My name's Rachel Cursai. I don't have as many hobbies as Kara, but I did start my career out really focused on media buying and planning for about 10 or so years, and then shifted my focus into B2B media technology and strategy. And since I joined Alcamo Marketing, I've really been focused on more of overseeing all of the operations, client support, and still overseeing a lot of that B2B technology piece as well.
Awesome. Yeah, those intros, it's hard to follow that one, Kara.
Yeah.
I mean, we both paused and we're just like, where do we even go? So much to take care of.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought 4 kids was busy.
I mean, we don't have kids yet, but that would really be the icing, wouldn't
it? Yeah, just throw a bunch in the mix. I mean, look, you need farm hands at some point. So
yes, big fan of child labor.
There you go. Yeah. All right. Well, speaking of labor and legal issues, no, I'd love to dive in and understand what has led to the decision to deprecate cookies in 2024, and how does that align with current privacy and security concerns?
Yeah, this is a great question because it is, when you look back, it's hard to, track exactly how we got here. But if I had to boil it down, there's 5 things. One is just privacy concerns. So on the consumer side, people have become more and more aware and therefore concerned about the way that their data, their information is being used and the privacy. So, I remember seeing an article back in the day about weather.com and how IBM acquired them, and they were able to actually see where someone lived, their home address, because of the data that was being collected by that app. And I think those kinds of things have led to just more awareness. I know Rachel also is going to talk about some of the regulatory changes that have come up.
Yeah, we've seen a lot over the years. If you look back, there's really been a timeline of changes, starting with those initial controversies back, I think, in 2012, 2013 with Safari and Chrome. And then we went into the Cambridge Analytica scandal that we all know about. And that kind of snowballed over time to what we're seeing happening today across all of the different browsers and where we are with Chrome now.
Yeah, so privacy concerns, regulatory changes like GDPR, CCPA, that has in turn led to the technology shifts and browser changes and a rise of alternative technologies, somewhat as a reaction to that, but also consumer preferences for personalization versus privacy. So as they become more aware and concerned, there's this desire to balance. Like, I don't want to see, I'm not a mechanic, my partner is, but I'm not. So I don't want to see the motorcycle part ads that he gets. I want to see my chicken ads and my, homesteading content. And so, you got to balance that with the desire and requirement for privacy.
Right. It's really interesting. People want a personalized experience, but at the same time, they don't want it too personalized. They almost feel like it gets to a point where it gets a little creepy. So how do we find that perfect mix as marketers?
Yeah, I love that. I was going to the creepy place too, because I think that's always the word that we use in the profession to say we want to be as personalized as possible without being creepy. So there's always that gray area that everyone's paying attention to. And, I know that for the marketers listening to this and the advertisers listening to this, there are challenges that come about without having cookies. So as cookies go away and we are trying to be personalized, how should we be adapting our strategies?
Yeah, so there's definitely quite a few challenges as marketers that we're seeing in the industry. So one is the precision in targeting that we're losing. So without those third-party cookies, we're essentially losing that additional piece of targeting that we rely heavily on when we're advertising on the digital side. So we're facing this piece where we no longer can target how we have in the past, focused on behaviors and focused on all of this third-party data that we've relied so heavily on. And then, Kara, there's also a measurement piece as well, right?
Yeah. This one's near and dear to me, being a big data nerd, but yeah, this really affects our measurement accuracy, right? Because cookies are what are often used to determine, oh, someone has been here before, or they were over there before, and now they're here. And without those cookies to track people across different sites, we can't attribute the activities in one domain to another as accurately. And I think this is a little bit of a blessing and a curse, if I can be honest, because I do think that in a lot of cases, B2B, more so maybe than like a CPG space, has become overly reliant or overly confident in some of the tracking and attribution that's out there, and ignoring some of the more inferential type of information you can get from non-deterministic tracking.
Yeah, exactly. And similarly, there's also going to be a large reliance on first-party data, which I also think of as a blessing and a curse, where this, going back to the conversation around third-party data not being readily available and using it in the same way, we're going to have to lean heavy on the first-party data that we have. And so that is definitely going to be a challenge for a lot of marketers, but also something that we can look at as an opportunity when we're thinking about the path forward and how we can come up with some unique solutions.
Yeah. And there's also, just things like compliance with privacy regulations. So with third-party cookies going away, or with more regulations, you're going to have to be considering, in the same way that we all have with GDPR and CCPA, okay, what do I need to do as a marketer to stay compliant and make sure that, this business is protected? You look at GDPR, I think it's 5% of revenue is a potential penalty. It's crazy when you think about the actual risk involved in something that seems like a really simple, update to the website or whatever. And then there's just complexity, fragmented ecosystems. Everybody has already started implementing different privacy controls differently, right, for GDPR. And it's going to just continue and explode even more with cookies, being depreciated. So we're going to have to navigate that.
Yeah. And I think one last piece here is the cost of it all, right? So we're very mindful of CPMs, of cost per conversions, of cost per all of these different, even lower funnel actions and pipeline data. And everything's going to get more expensive as this targeting becomes a bit trickier. So we're going to have to lean heavier on different technologies and platforms, and the partners that do have that data, like let's say LinkedIn, for example, has a lot of that first party data that we can leverage. They are going to make it more expensive as well, because they know that we have to rely on that data. So there's a lot of different pieces there that people are going to see a big increase in what they're spending for the same thing that they were getting previously for cheaper.
Yeah. I mean, LinkedIn's the perfect example. Think about 5 years ago, what was a normal CPM on LinkedIn, and what is it now? It's exploded 10, 100x in some cases. So that's not going to change. It's actually going to get even more expensive because it's a limited inventory, limited pool of publishers that have that first party data that you can use and trust to reach that audience.
I'd love to jump into some of the strategies, but I do have a question about that increase in costs, right? When we think about CPMs, I know plenty of marketing leaders that have a number they pull out of their hat and they're used to, hey, our CPM needs to be around here. And with this is a big change. This is not just a small incremental change. It's a big change. What would you say to the marketers listening that may need to completely reevaluate benchmarks, baselines, how they think of their advertising costs? Because it sounds like it's a whole new world as we go forward in this. Like, if you could put your arms around them and shake them just a little bit, what would you say?
Yeah. I mean, it's a good question. And I think it's a similar conversation to one that we have currently with a cost per conversion or cost per lead or cost per MQL metric, right? So it's the same type of thing that happens when you shift from a lead-based measurement framework to an account-based measurement framework. You're not going to look at a cost per MQL in the same way that you did previously. It just isn't used in the same manner. So the way that we kind of look at it is more of a work back from your revenue and pipeline target. It's less about, oh, what is an acceptable CPM? And it's more about how many times, what's the total size of my audience that I'm trying to reach? How many times do I need to reach them to be effective? And how much is that potentially going to cost me? And kind of working through the whole buying journey in that way and making sure that that fits with your revenue, the financial model for revenue. Because even if you got a $5 CPM, if that doesn't translate ultimately into your pipeline and revenue target, it doesn't really matter.
Great. Totally get it. On the first session with Gareth, we talked about how many folks are surprised, and I'm using air quotes, surprised that cookies are going away because they were kicking the can down farther and farther and farther. It's been talked about for so long. I think folks almost didn't expect it to happen. But what are you seeing the best digital marketers doing? So how are they adapting their targeting and advertising strategies to make sure they're still reaching their audience?
I think going back to those original challenges, really investing in their first party data is a huge opportunity. So finding ways to bring in, for example, your CRM data into your performance reporting and into your strategies where you can build some similar audiences and really leverage that data and information to understand how it's performing. That will continue to be a huge strategy as we're moving away from some of the additional capabilities. And then, Kara, there's definitely an opportunity around new technologies as well.
Yeah. And sometimes I think of it not even as a new technology. Some of these have been around for a long time. It's just that they haven't been as commonplace in B2B as they have in, say, retail CPG or more consumer-based marketing. So I think of something like LiveRamp, for example, hugely used in retail and hasn't really been leveraged as much in B2B unless it's by a big enterprise brand. But you really are going to need, to use your first-party data. Think about the match rates, right? When you upload a list of work emails or you're syncing over a list of contacts from demand-based to LinkedIn, the match rate on a work email is going to be very low, no matter if it's demand-based or Marketo, whatever you're using, because 90% of people have their personal email in LinkedIn, not their work email. So in that case, you really need a tool, an identity resolution provider who can take that work email, that work identity, and match it to their identity graph so that it also includes the consumer ID. And that is what's going to get your match rate up, right? So that in particular is not new technology, but it's just not really been leveraged. And, that's why I love some of the things that Demandbase is doing with the partnerships that you have and sort of having your own identity graph that also leverages other ones. One thing that's important to consider too, when we're thinking about identity resolution partners is the concept of an account in the graph. So there's a lot of data providers out there who, if you went to them and you said, oh, I want to, target a list of people who are this job title and these companies, whatever, they may be able to do that, but they don't have the concept of an account in their graph, right? They only have people, individuals. And so it would be like if you had Salesforce without an account object in it. Yeah, technically you could have a field on the person that says this is the company they're at, but it's just a very different looking sort of infrastructure. And so, these new technologies or new uses or new applications of technologies are going to be critical for getting the full power and value out of that first party data. It's already there and it's just so under leveraged. even if cookies weren't going away, you still would want to do it. All right. So then also, in terms of strategies, there's some privacy first things that are, Google's privacy sandbox, for example, is a big topic of discussion. It remains to be seen how effective it is. I know there was that recent article, I think IAB was put out that basically said, no, it doesn't do what we need it to do. And now Google's saying, oh, yes, it does. You just didn't look at the right thing. So it will remain to be seen. But, we'll still look at those and how we can apply them. One other thing, though, if you're thinking about, okay, first party data, that's really a big component of this and of the strategies. How do we, in addition to using an identity partner, we need to collect as much as we can. And how do we collect and build our first party data? And it's really by enhancing the customer experience. What is the value that you're offering to someone to precipitate that exchange of information? What do you have that actually makes them want to provide that to you and take the risk in some cases of giving you the ability to email them or market to them? And so I think that, personalizing the experience, building loyalty programs, just content that actually engages and provides value versus just, hey, give me your email and here's a white paper that, doesn't actually help you in any way. That's going to be critical. And then, this is a kind of a more general strategy, but just collaboration. I think within, anytime there's a big change like this in an industry, I think it's critical for people to collaborate, to talk to each other people in the industry. How are you adapting to this? What are you doing? What are some solutions? And so I think that happens organically within people's networks. And it also happens at an industry level with different industry groups, like IAB, working to sort of define and design the future of this digital advertising world post cookies.
And then, Kara, I do think we're going to start seeing a resurgence in contextual targeting too, including relying more heavily on direct publisher buys, and then in general, just focusing on the content and using that either as intent data or really personalizing the messaging around relevant content will really start to be the focus with targeting when available.
I love this too, because I think that we've become it's been an interesting shift in the last 15 years or so to go from site direct buys, and then the advent, programmatic was like the new hot thing. And, it's the only thing. It's like, if you're not buying on an audience, what are you doing? And not the only thing, obviously, we still do a good bit of publisher buying. But I think in a lot of cases, we've lost sight of the fact that we're buying not just on a job title or a company size, right? The person in an account that is your buyer is not necessarily always the one with the title you think, especially when you get into enterprise or when you look at the difference between a mid-market buying group versus an enterprise buying group. And so I love the idea of using, I usually say behaviors, but in this case, the behavior of consuming some content that is only content that the buyer who's in that, champion role is going to be consuming, rather than focusing just on, oh, well, do they have that title? It's like, well, no, not necessarily, but it could be an intern or someone that's been deputized by a CISO. And the CISO said, all right, go out, do some research, put a report together for me. And so they're the one looking at that publisher, looking at that content. And if you're targeting contextually, you're going to be there. But if you were only targeting in that same inventory off of a title for CISOs only, you're not going to be there and you're not going to be in that report. So I like this as a kind of forcing mechanism for people to rethink their targeting.
Yeah, I like it too. But Chris, back to your question around pricing, this is definitely one of the reasons why we're going to start to see that uptick in pricing, because a direct buy with, dark reading, the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, those are not cheap. So we'll start to see that increase there too.
Definitely. And I love the word curmudgeon. Okay. I'm going to embrace it. I've been kind of a curmudgeon in marketing for a very long time. And I do feel there's some irony of what's happening in our industry right now, right? Like, I think most are talking about AI as it relates to content as a means of faster production, producing more content. But if we think about a lot of the strategies you just talked about, where we need more information and we need more first party data and we need that context of the buying group and not maybe one individual person or title, it seems like we may be oversimplifying how we should approach content. And going back to the early days of pure content marketing, let's create amazing experiences with extremely valuable content where we can capture that data ourselves and understand, like, hey, do they want this benchmark? Or how are you thinking about that? Because I always go into curmudgeon mode a little bit and think that sometimes we're chasing the next shiny object or squirrel when really the common sense answer is punching us in the face over and over and over.
Okay, first of all, I love the use of the word curmudgeon as an English major, which somehow led me to this inexplicably. Love the use of the word curmudgeon, so thank you for that. But yeah, I agree. I think that it's easy to get attracted by the latest and greatest, and in time lose the foundations, right? Because I see this happen a lot too with companies that are using, I'll just use LinkedIn, for example. They're so caught up in the targeting that they can use that they're not thinking as much about what are they offering, right? Is the creative, is the offer actually compelling? Do people care about it? They're as something as foundational as just what's the hook, right? One of the most foundational concepts in marketing, what's the hook? And it isn't there because there's so much focus on the technology and the targeting piece. And so, yeah, I think you're right. I think that you've got to get the foundations right. That's 80% of it. And then the 20% is how do I enhance and accelerate on those foundations using things like AI and big data and technology.
Love that. And Carrie, you may want to tackle this one first, and then I'm sure, Rachel, you'll have some thoughts too. But last question before we kind of close out with some fun questions. How are marketers adjusting their approach to tracking and analyzing campaign performance without traditional cookie-based metrics?
Yeah, I mean, I think to Rachel's point earlier, there is more use of first-party data. So more focus on collecting and analyzing data directly, that they have, like website visits, app usage, CRM, things that's collected in CRM. And I think to get the most out of that, having an identity-based partner who can de-anonymize a lot of those touch points, at least at the account level, is going to be critical. So, for example, one of the things we love doing with Demandbase is using the account activity reports to then analyze the impact of different types of touch points or different tactics or campaigns to say, all right, control, this group of accounts was exposed to this campaign, this group of accounts wasn't. Is there a statistically significant lift in conversion to opportunity or in close rate or in velocity? And in that case, you don't need the last click direct attribution, but you do need those anonymized or de-anonymized account activities, like as simple as a page view, right? And so I think those two are critical for analysis, tracking and analysis. Certainly, utilizing some privacy preserving APIs again, like the privacy sandbox. I don't know, are they still using Flock? I feel like everyone's talking privacy sandbox now, but we'll see how that goes. I know we'll be interested in getting our hands on some of that. CRM, I know a lot of people are building out more robust objects and fields in CRM. I see a lot of people using Visible, which I like and I have issues with because I love that it unifies a lot of the touch points and it gives you the ability to analyze more data. What I don't like is that it doesn't account for all of those touch points. So an anonymous visit to the site by an account, that's not coming up as a visible touch point, and it's going to get zero revenue. An impression on LinkedIn, or a set of impressions on LinkedIn, they're getting zero credit in the visible attribution model. So, I take a little issue with that. And I think that's where that, applying more advanced analytics and AI, and even non-advanced, to be honest, that is the key to adjusting the approach for measurement, right? I think that even just basic statistical analysis is hugely underleveraged right now in marketing. And in some cases, because the data is just not there, either it's not actionable, it's not clean, or there's not enough of it. But in a lot of cases, I think it's also just a lot of marketers don't have that skill set and they don't have access in their team to a data scientist who can do this type of work for them. Even it's funny too, because we work with a lot of tech companies and their whole business is data and technology, and they might have an army of data scientists and the marketing team doesn't get access to them, or they're last in the queue because they're busy working on the product. But I think that, basic statistical analysis, like a two-tailed test, right? Like the example I gave earlier, two sets of accounts, exposed and control. I want to analyze, is there a statistically significant lift if an account saw a campaign or not, or did a certain activity or not? That's a pretty basic analysis that you can do that doesn't require third-party cookies.
I love that.
I think the big takeaway here is that you really, really, from the analytics side, need to bring in some experts to get you through this phase. And in the past, if you have just been kind of piecing it together, trying your best, working with the team that you have, but maybe don't have that background in advanced analytics, AI, statistics, now is the time to really bring in some experts, because if you were already struggling with data before this, you're definitely going to struggle with it now.
Yeah. It reminds me of, where maybe digital was, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, where you had a lot of marketers who are like, it's a fad, it's a phase. Or maybe they would bring in like a digital person and they just didn't see the need to learn anything about digital. And now it's like, who even are you? If you have zero knowledge, there's no way you're going to progress. You can't be a CMO today and not know anything about digital. I mean, I'm sorry, you can't. And I think that that's happening now with data and technology expertise, right? Marketers who to date have, to Rachel's point, sort of gotten by with a very basic Excel skills and thinking that they're doing an analysis of a campaign, they're going to need to up level, or they're going to be old news, because it's so much more compelling and actionable. If I come in and I say, one person says, oh, this creative is better because the click-through rate is higher. It's much different if I come in and I say, well, I did a, two-tailed test and the p-value of, 0.05 tells me that this creative is has a better click-through rate. Just using the language and the actual statistics, I did a terrible job at it, which I just took a whole data science course too. I would absolutely horrify my professors, but you can see the language is very different. And when you make decisions off of real, true, statistically grounded analysis, the outputs and the results are going to be so much different than when you think you're making a decision off of an analysis. But really, it's almost worse than not using the data at all.
Yeah, great advice. I think we need to avoid our typical marketing throw an intern solution at it, which happened with digital, social content. I mean, pretty much every new function that started to get a lot of time and attention, it was, we'll get an intern for that. And yeah, definitely not the case with analytics and understanding this new world without cookies. So thank you both for tons of amazing content. This has been extremely helpful. And you know this, but we like to close out the show with two consistent questions. So the first is about good reads. Is there a book, blog, newsletter, or podcast that you'd recommend to our listeners?
Yes. I just got back from vacation and I was voraciously reading the entire time. And one that I really enjoyed is A World Without Email if you know Cal Newport. He also wrote Deep Work, which is a concept that we are so into the concept of deep work. It's in our company handbook, but essentially it's reimagining how business can work and get out of what he calls the hyperactive hive mind of Slack and email and just sort of context switching 600 times a day and actually do good quality work, but still communicate effectively. And I just found it fascinating. Rachel's probably terrified because She's the one that implements all of our processes, and I'm about to come in hot with some new ones.
I'm ready for it.
Yeah, Rachel, you may have to get a book to recommend that's a counterpoint to that.
Yeah.
That could be your recommendation next.
Mm-hmm.
Rachel, if you want to add a book, you can add a book too. But the other question we usually ask is about good people. Could you share the names of 3 inspirational people in the B2B space that you recommend we bring to the show?
Yeah. I mean, Renee Asis is a good personal friend of mine, but he also, probably because I've latched on to him, after meeting him in a professional context, he's probably taught me everything I know about B2B ad tech and measurement. He is a brilliant mind. The way he understands the technical components of what's happening in the back end is really impressive. And especially when you talk about cookieless, he's just, he runs circles around us. Jen Lever, she is a friend as well and a client, and just a great mind. We kind of joke we have similar brains, just really great mind when it comes to B2B, creative, inventive, in the weeds too. And she just joined one of our clients, CloudBolt, I don't know, December maybe, and she's already just really pushing and doing some great things. So she's also just fun to riff with. And then someone I think too, Sophia Augustina, who is just the most fun human being and so warm and intelligent and also very impressive. She's over at IBM and doing some really interesting things with demand base, I believe, actually, specifically, but she's a great speaker as well. I saw her at Forrester B2B last year, and man, I could listen to her and chat with her for hours.
Definitely. Yeah, she is high energy too. She always brings the energy, which is awesome. And Rachel, maybe you can tackle the very last question. How can people get in touch with both of you after the podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. You can go to alcamomarketing.com and fill out a form. Alcamo is spelled Alcamo. And you can also get in touch with us through LinkedIn. Feel free to find us, and we'd love to connect with you.
Awesome. Well, Kara and Rachel, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for all the great content, fighting the good fight on this to help everyone get this right. So thank you both.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. It was super fun. I always love talking about this, so appreciate you having us on.
All right. Enjoy the bees and animals and everything you mentioned before.
I will.
Thanks for joining us for On Base. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to share, rate, review, and subscribe on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. This show is brought to you by Demandbase, the only account-based experience platform built for sales and marketing alignment.